What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 15 DFS MVP. I am your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4for4.com. As always, with my co-host, Matt Savoca. If you're new to this show, what we usually do is go over our favorite values on the slate and talk about a theory segment. But this week is anything but usual. Obviously, if you're watching this, you're probably aware that we have had a lot of shuffling of games, postponements of games, and basically it blew up our whole script, so we decided to blow up the whole show. Today we're going to do things a little bit differently. As we record this Friday, so many values have been blown off of the slate that we're just going to go game by game and kind of freestyle our thoughts on this crazy week, and hopefully get you guys involved if you are watching or listening and take some of your questions. Before we get into all of that, make sure you're checking out our other shows. We still have our cash game review every Monday here on YouTube at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Every Saturday, Yahoo DFS Values with Matt Harmon comes out on the DFS MVP feed as well as the Yahoo Fantasy feed. If you listen to that tomorrow, it'll probably be very irrelevant because we recorded it on Thursday, so enjoy that. Sunday morning, probably the most important one of the year this week, the DFS GPP Last Look show with Jordan Vanek. That's Sunday, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Subscriber-only Discord with all the craziness this week. I would highly recommend getting into our Discord channel because things are changing literally by the minute at this point. We thought we were going to have a two-game Saturday slate this week. We don't anymore, but as far as we know right now, we still have a showdown slate. So we have Saturday showdown content up for you guys already on the site. And next week, things will be a little bit different. With it being Christmas Eve, this show will be recorded at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're used to watching us at this time slot, make sure you switch it up in your calendars because we know this is more important than your family time on Christmas Eve. If you haven't signed up for 4for4 yet, make sure you get that rest of season price. The DFS price is down to $24 for the rest of the season, and you can get an additional 10% off with the promo code DFS MVP. We're going through Super Bowl, and if things go anywhere like we've seen this week, there's going to be a lot of extra slates to get value out of that subscription. Before we get into the game by game breakdown, just want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by WynnBet. WynnBet is bringing the excitement of Wynn Las Vegas to online sports betting. Get in on all of your favorite teams, players, and sports. From boosted parlays to live in-game odds on every major sport, we have what you need to win. Sign up today to receive a special offer, a risk-free $1,000 sports bet. Download the WynnBet app now and use the promo code 4for4. That's the number 4, FR, the number 4, to claim your risk-free bet today. Mr. Savoca, welcome to Week 15. You and I, we write content every week. We grind for days at a time to try to get ready for the show and our articles, and all that's gone. I would say this is I mean, first of all, how are you? How are you doing? How are you holding up with this week?
Hey, I'm doing well. If you had told me a year ago I would be here on Friday night hosting the show, I wouldn't have believed you. So I'm going to take a little perspective call and say I'm still very happy to be here. But guys, welcome to Whose Slate Is It Anyway, where the players are made up and the projections don't matter. Beautiful. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is completely unprecedented. More people on the COVID list this week than the entire rest of the season combined. 2 games moved off the main slate, including the main player that you were locking into lineups on both DraftKings and FanDuel. This is wild. Hey, but I'm still excited to be here. It's Christmas week. We still got a lot to be thankful for, but hey, if it is your first time joining us, what a week you chose to get into DFS and the DFS MVP, but we're still happy you're here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is unprecedented, but I mean, we do actually have some precedent for this, right? Last year we did have a lot of these crazy slates, games getting moved to Tuesdays, Wednesdays. I think we had a game every day of the week at some point last year. So, I mean, there still is DFS to play. It's going to be a very condensed slate where it's down to 9 games. So not nearly as many. Like, I think usually the smallest slate we have is 10 games. But I mean, we still do have a lot of edge to gain. There still are slates that are going to run, and there are a lot of people that are just going to throw their hands up and say, screw it, I don't know what to do, and probably put out some really bad lineups. Like, what's your take on a week like this? And again, like, we're still going to have, if nothing moves from this point on, we're still going to have a day and a half, 2 days to digest all of the information available. How do you approach like a slate like this in general? Like, just any thoughts at all?
Yeah, I think this comes down to one of the lessons we've been trying to harp on, especially in our cash game review show, which is just find the best plays, stick to them, and let others make mistakes around you. Obviously, if you're talking about GPPs or trying to get contrarian and beat a lot of people, then you're going to have to do the same. You have to, throw something at a wall more so this week than other weeks. But for the most part, we still have stud wide receivers. We still are probably paying up at that position versus running back, which is what we felt at the beginning of the week. And we're still seeing premium quarterbacks as more of a luxury than something that is easy to get to. By the time you listen to this or watch this on Sunday, there might be some free square running back, say in Arizona, that has opened up. But at this point on Friday, we don't have extreme value plays really on either site. So the macro structure of the slate doesn't change, just the players we're recommending do.
Yeah, I think people might look at this week and just say it's a mess, like I mentioned, and maybe not want to play or think about dialing back their volume. I mean, I would say if there's ever a week just to lean into whatever you think your strengths are, it is a week like this. We were already going into this week. It was going to be maybe one of the worst running back weeks we've ever seen on a main slate. Like I wrote up 4 running back plays for my cash game write-up, and one of those is already off the slate. Another one might not be available because of COVID. I think that people are going to see a lot of names that they're not used to rostering. There are going to be a lot of players that are just going to be making egregious errors because they don't understand lineup construction. They're going to be wanting to force in names that they know, and that's going to lead to really big mistakes. So I think if you are doing your due diligence and you understand just the general concepts of DFS and things like this is a week where if you're playing cash games, you're probably playing 4 wide receivers. Something as simple as that can really set you apart from the field. From a GPP perspective, I think that the slate is so condensed and I mean, there are so few games that it really lends itself to really leaning into like onslaught type strategies where if you could pinpoint the one game that goes off, you're probably going to really be able to climb up leaderboards relatively easily just because there aren't that many games. It's going to be really hard to be high scoring with so few options. So I think this is still going to be a really good week. But again, the values that we had planned, the quote unquote locks that we had have really been blown up. So let's just go game by game and you talk about any thoughts you have on FanDuel and we'll freestyle this thing a little bit and I'll give you my take on DraftKings. Let's start with Arizona at Detroit. Arizona, nice. Thanks for that beautiful graphic, Sal.
Sal.
We have Arizona favored by 12.5 with the highest implied point total on slate, 30 points. Anything that stands out to you on FanDuel from this Arizona game?
I think you can get to Kyler Murray. Yeah, and honestly, all of this uncertainty related to the backfield, we still don't know as of Friday evening what this backfield is going to look like. James Conner has essentially missed practice all week. We don't know if Chase Edmonds is going to be activated. Is it going to be Eno Benjamin week? Are they going to start using Rondale Moore out of the backfield? Because that's the kind of week it's been where he suddenly just turns into a running back. I'm not actually suggesting that. Really what this brings me back to is Kyler Murray. I think you can get to Kyler on FanDuel especially. And I will say that right now in our value rankings, he's number 1 among quarterbacks. He has a 5.1 ranking, meaning if you can get to him, play him. But, if at the end of the day, Kyler was the QB1 and you kind of needed to have his score to get to the top of tournaments, would anyone be surprised against Detroit?
Yeah. I think I agree with that completely. On DraftKings, he was already in my player pool as a cash game play, viable as a standalone play, but not something that we were necessarily going to be forcing in. Now with Cooper Kupp off the slate, who was going to be our main pay up guy, it does leave a lot of trying to figure out where you're going to spend up. I think people are probably still going to get to Devontae, but I think you can comfortably fit in Kyler at 7,900 on DraftKings. And from a cash game perspective, compared to Josh Allen, I actually think he's just a better straight up play than Josh Allen, because we don't know how much Josh Allen is going to be running. So Kyler is fine. I mean, we know that we could affordably stack him with either AJ Green or Christian Kirk. I don't think you need to force those guys in cash games, because we still do have some really good wide receiver value on the slate where you can pay down and be a little more confident in where those targets are going to go. Obviously, in tournaments, that's fine. Zach Ertz is a really good standalone value on DraftKings. He's kind of in an awkward salary range where I don't think you're probably going to fit him into cash games. I don't think you need to, but obviously you could stack him as well. I do think two very interesting GPP options in this game are playing a naked Kyler Murray. Like, there's a really good chance he can throw for 300 and rush for 2 or 3. I think he actually did that last week. I don't think he threw, or was that the week before? I don't know.
He threw for 383 and ran for like 60. Still insane stat line.
So I think
if typical Kyler stat line.
And if the touchdowns come with his legs, then you're not going to miss much on the stacking front. And I don't think a lot of people are going to use bringbacks in this game. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is a really interesting one. Josh Reynolds questionable. TJ Hawkinson on IR. St. Brown has had a really big target share over the last 6 weeks. So he's somebody that you could consider, especially on DraftKings or it's full PPR, somebody that I would definitely consider. Another exciting game, I briefly mentioned this, Buffalo versus Carolina in Buffalo. Buffalo favored by 12 with an implied point total of 28.25. What are you seeing on FanDuel on this game?
Gabe Davis. It's all about Gabriel Davis. He's still a solid option. Well, I think they're 10-point favorites currently. And one thing you will say is that I think the possibility of this game being closer for longer it's more probable here than, say, the Cardinals taking care of business against the Detroit in that last game we were talking about. So I do think so long as Josh Allen is healthy enough to play his normal game, then we can project the Bills' offense to do really well. Even Stephon Diggs becomes a more viable option if you think that the macro strategy of getting 2 stud wide receivers, especially on FanDuel in cash games, is still the way to go. So Carolina's been okay in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, not so much that I'm going to stay away from the Buffalo receivers.
Yeah, I haven't, outside of Gabe Davis, who is one of our top values at wide receiver on DraftKings. I don't think you need to force any of these other players into cash games. Gabe Davis sub for $4,000. He is a lock button. We saw him play 83% of snaps last week with Emmanuel Sanders sidelined early in that game with his injury that's keeping him out this week. We know that the Bills are going to pass a ton. Gabe Davis has been second in yards per route run over the past 6 weeks and has also had a ton of red zone work over the past 6 weeks. And then another player in that game that I do think is interesting, people are going to play Josh Allen a ton in tournaments. They're going to stack him with Diggs. They're going to stack him with Gabriel Davis. Dawson Knox is relatively expensive on both sides. I don't think he's going to see nearly the ownership of Gabe Davis or Diggs, so I really like Dawson Knox as a tournament pivot. Whether you're onslaughting the game or throwing him in there with Diggs, I don't think on this slate you need to like there are times where we've seen like a Josh Allen, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley work. Those have been on slates where we have a lot of high salary players and you want to get to them. I don't think it makes much sense to roll out a tournament lineup without Diggs. Like, obviously it can work. Wide receivers are volatile, but on the slate like this where we just don't have that many high-end players, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But Dawson Knox is a fantastic leverage play in that game. Not interested in the running backs for obvious reasons. And on the Carolina side, I just don't see how you consider bringing it back. Cam Newton isn't even guaranteed to get all of the reps. They're talking about a rotation. He has more turnovers than starts this year. And I guess DJ Moore's an okay value, but we can't trust the quarterbacks to get it to them. Moving on to a game that I haven't really looked at much. Denver versus Cincinnati. Denver's favored by 3 at home with an over-under of 44.5. Anything to talk about on this game? I mean, we have Joe Mixon, who nobody's talking about because he has missed some practice, but he's probably the highest touch floor running back on the slate. And then on the other side, the running back, what do we do with the Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon situation? And of course, Jamar and T can always hit.
Yeah, that's the first thing I was actually going to say, is that this game has gotten kind of overlooked, and we kind of just admitted it ourselves here. I haven't paid much attention to it. I'm not valuing it super high for cash games. In our value rankings, none of the players are up there, and yet it's really a competition between Joe Mixon and Najee Harris about who gets the most running back touches on this slate here.
Yep.
And Jamar Chase is a player who can get 120 yards and a touchdown every single week. Same with T. Higgins. In expected fantasy points, T. Higgins is actually a wide receiver 1 among just the wide receivers on this slate. And so, I mean, the opportunity is likely there. It's just that the matchup kind of steers us away. I think they're really solid GPP plays, to be honest. And even if you want to go back to Javonte Williams, you can. But Melvin Gordon is not going away. He had more touches right away coming back last week.
Yeah, I'm pretty concerned about using either Denver running back in any format. Obviously, they're not cash game options this week. It's a situation where when I was targeting Javonte before even before his blow up, he actually had a 20-point game that somehow kind of got overlooked. That was on the main slate, but we were playing him because he was like a 5% play, right? So even if he's a 15% play this week, again, running back super weak, I just don't want any part of that because there's just way too much downside there. Obviously, Jamar can hit at any time. I think he's a really good standalone play pretty much on any slate. Denver has given up some big games to similar profile wide receivers. I think the most interesting thing from this game is Joe Mixon, because most lineups are going to be 2 running back builds, and very few lineups are going to pay up for Mixon or Najee Harris. Not excited about Najee, but we do know Cincinnati can put up some pretty big offensive games, and Joe Mixon can obviously be a big part of that. So I think a very obvious way to flip the build this week is to pay up for running back. There just aren't going to be a lot of lineups that are doing that. I don't know if it would be like in a primary single entry, but if you're playing large field stuff, it makes a lot of sense for me. So for me, Jamar as a one-off just because he's missed some opportunities and I think people are sour on him, and Joe Mixon is to flip the build because if people are using relatively expensive running backs, I think it'll be in this next game that we're going to talk about, Dallas at New York. Dallas is favored by 11. Over-under is only 44 points. Nice hangover graphic there from Sal. This one is interesting because I don't think we really have any cash game players in this game. I think people might use Saquon a little bit in cash, especially on DraftKings, just because, again, we just don't have running backs. I think in tournaments, because Dallas is a huge favorite, Tony Pollard is questionable, even though we saw Corey Clement get work, Zeke might just get popular because there aren't any other running backs. So how are you approaching this game?
Yeah, I mean, Zeke is kind of at that point where just when I thought it was out, they're dragging me back in because he's 10.5 point favorites. I'm kind of going against fundamentals to say, hey, I know better than math in what Ezekiel Elliott has looked like. And hey, he hasn't been efficient this year, but if you look at things like evaded tackles or evaded tackles per touch, he isn't complete dust, which is what it feels like every time I'm watching him this season. So I do want to mention from a GPP perspective, I guess you could play him in cash, but I really do like Dalton Schultz. There are only 12 players who have under a 6K salary on FanDuel and have a route participation rate above 90% in any position, and Dalton Schultz is one of them. A couple that I didn't mention from previous games, Robbie Anderson and Cortland Sutton also fit that bill. But if you're looking for a GPP tight end option on a quality offense, and guys, remember that tight ends on heavy favorites correlate well with fantasy scoring, just like running backs here. Schultz looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, I should have said earlier in the podcast, anything that I say in reference to probable ownership, take with a slight grain of salt. I haven't updated ownership projections yet. I'm not doing that till late tomorrow because I'm just not doing it 4 times this week. So I'm waiting until we get as much information as possible. But I do still think that there is a pretty good chance that Zeke is relatively popular. The play that really stands out to me in this game is CeeDee Lamb. I think he's just going to go, even with some ownership and salary opening up, I still think people are going to go to Devontae, to Debo, to Stephon Diggs. Even though CeeDee Lamb is cheaper than those guys, he is pretty close to Diggs' salary range. So I really like him as a strong leverage play if we do end up thinking Zeke is going to be like 20% in tournaments. I have no interest in any player on either side in cash games. So not much else to say about that game. This next game is the most interesting one to me because when I do run ownership projections tomorrow, I think this is the one that could get juiced up the most, taking ownership away from Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp for the simple reason that Davante Adams is basically like the perfect usage and salary pivot from Kupp, who was going to be the mega chalk on this slate. Green Bay is at Baltimore, favored by a touchdown with an over-under of 25. We still don't have news on Lamar Jackson, so that obviously makes it really hard to trust any Ravens. If Jackson is out, is Huntley cash viable? And then what else are you doing with this game?
Yeah, so I'm playing Davante Adams. Obviously, it's really a matter of, can I get to Adams and Samuel, or do I have to decide one of the two? On FanDuel, I think it is a little bit easier to be on team jam them in for wide receivers. It's kind of fun. But Davante Adams has 10 to 15 targets, floor and ceiling every single time he steps on the field. Yep. Baltimore has been bottom 10 this season in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They just can't overcome the amount of injuries they've had in the secondary. And they still do have some quality players. Anthony Averett is still graded very, very highly via PFF. But still, I think that Davante Adams is going to get his, to the point where I'm fine having him as my anchor point in cash games and then making all my other decisions off of that.
Yeah, Davante Adams is the lock button in cash this week on both sides. It's not even a question at this point. There just isn't another player. I don't even know on the slate. Let me look at DraftKings floor projections, but I don't know if there's another non-quarterback that has a higher theoretical floor than Adams. Let me look at the projection floor. We actually have Debo projected for a higher floor than Devontae.
It's a really good conversation,
which is surprising to me. I'm going to disagree with that. That probably has something to do with the guaranteed rushes that we have Samuel projected for. But I would much rather play Davante Adams in cash. Before we got these games being moved around, we were expecting the Rams to get a ton of ownership, and I was really liking the Packers as a tournament play, a Rodgers Adams stack. You were going to get at a discount compared to Stafford and Cooper Kupp. I still think it's an interesting game to stack because MVS is questionable, but I like game stacks with the Packers if you can include MVS, because there are other situations where people can stack their quarterback and have a really good paydown option. A ton of people are going to play Buffalo and include Gabe Davis in the stack, and then a lot of people are going to play Tua with Devontae Parker, so it leaves MVS just as like this leverage play on the paydown option. Again, he's questionable, so that goes with the theme of week 15. But if he is active, he's going to be a really nice way to lower the average ownership of Green Bay stacks. But again, I think Rodgers and definitely Devontae could get disproportionately popular this week. Before we move on to the second half of the games on this slate, I want to tell you about the easiest and most fun way to spice up your fantasy football season besides playing in week 15. It's Underdog Fantasy and their brand new pick'em game. Just pick the over or the under on your favorite or your least favorite player stats, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Pick between 2 and 5 players, and you could take home some cold, hard cash. Head to 4for4.com/underdog to claim your free 4for4 Pro subscription and get $10 bonus cash to play this weekend. We still do have games.
You gotta bottle some of this energy, some of this TJ Fitzpatrick Hernandez here. This is this is great. The slight DGAF while still digging in. Like, we got some solid info here.
I mean, listen, man, if this is the week 4, the DGAF is heavy on the week 15 slate. As much as the value plays have been blown up this week, we still got really good values in this game. Jets at Dolphins. Dolphins favored by 9.5 points. The over-under is only 41, but we have 25.25 implied point total for Miami. What do you like in this game?
You got to play Devontae Parker. I think he's kind of that skeleton key that helps you get to all the other players in this slate that you want to get to. And from there, you can make other decision points, especially in cash games. Just lock him in, figure out other things later. Looking at our stack value rankings, he's the 6th best QB receiver 1 stack on FanDuel. I don't really see there a reason to go away from him unless you're trying to beat a lot of people who might be rostering Parker, in which case I'm totally fine going with Gesicki. You saw 11 targets last week. There's some volatility in his opportunity. We've literally seen a goose egg in a game in the second half of the season, but they're playing the Jets. They're playing an NCAA defense. You're going to want to get to the Dolphins so that you can get to the other great players in great spots.
Yeah, and Devontae Parker will be popular. I think you should still be able to get Tua at sub 10% in tournaments. I think you could definitely justify a Tua, Devontae, Gesicki stack. And Devontae Parker will be mega chalk, but Gesicki and Tua should bring down that average ownership enough to where it's not crazy. We still don't know. I think Myles Gaskins could still clear protocol if he ends up active.
He cleared.
Yeah, so he is actually like cash viable for me at this point because running back is so weak and Miami is favored by so much. Before we got all of the shuffling and players taken off of the slate, Tua was my preferred cash game quarterback on DraftKings. I think there's enough paydown options now where I'm probably going to prioritize Kyler's rushing, but again, I have to build, so take that a little bit with a grain of salt. But Tua and Kyler are probably the 2 cash game quarterbacks I'm looking at. I said Devontae Adams is the lock. It's the Devontae duo this week. Lock Devontae Adams, lock Devontae Parker, lock.
Hey, I do want to add one thing for this game too. I don't know if I've ever heard of this player before, but DJ Montgomery got serious run for the New York Jets last week. Saw 6 targets, ran 85% of routes. I don't think a lot of people know who DJ Montgomery is. If you need a run back that like literally 3 people in the Millionaire Maker might play, his name is DJ Montgomery and he plays for the New York Jets.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clearly like a very large field play, but I mean, especially on DraftKings where it is PPR, that makes that could make sense. Braxton Berrios got a ton of targets last week too. A lot of us thought it was going to be Jamison Crowder, and by a lot of us, maybe I just mean me, but it ended up being Braxton Berrios who did lead the team. So I think you can make an argument where if you are going to stack Tua, that you could bring it back with one of those guys and get the PPR points and hope for some kind of ugly touchdown. Michael Carter's popping in value ranks here, and I believe he's projecting pretty well on other sites. I haven't checked, but I'm not comfortable playing Carter in cash games coming off of that injury just because it's a horrible injury, and it's one that shows up even when they come off IR, and they're huge underdogs. So I'd rather play Gaskin on the other side, even though he's more expensive. I get wanting to play Carter if you playing him in tournaments and game stacks. Fine. He's not a player that I'm going to be targeting this week. And Gesicki, he, from a value perspective, he's very much like Zach Ertz, who I discussed is on DraftKings in that awkward salary range where I don't think you end up playing him in cash. But Parker's a cash game lock for me. Moving on to Atlanta at San Francisco. Another big spread here. San Francisco favored by 9 points. The over-under is 46. I think we got official word right before we came on here that Elijah Mitchell is out. This is not COVID related, but he's not active. So any interest in anybody besides Debo or George Kittle in this game? And you talk about Debo and George Kittle as well if you'd like.
Yeah. how can you say anything bad about the two of them? I mean, credit to Kyle Shanahan for just understanding that the best way for their team to win is for their offense to get the ball in Deebo Samuel's hands, and they don't care how it happens.
Yeah.
He's getting to wide receiver 1 level production with 1 to 5 targets in a game. This is kind of unprecedented, except for the fact that it happened earlier this season with Cordero Patterson. It's sort of that positionless transition of skill position players. It's pretty cool. And George Kittle is like a video game where, his yards after the catch ability is, second to none. So the fact that you can pair both of them up with a very inexpensive quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo in such a plus matchup, it's really, really appealing if you're trying to create a stack for tournaments. In cash games, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because I actually think the big decision, we've kind of alluded to it already on the show, is Davante Adams versus Deebo Samuel, or can you get to both? On FanDuel, it's much more possible than it is on DraftKings. On DraftKings, it gets really, really tight.
Yeah, I love Kittle on this slate on DraftKings. He actually, again, even before we had the news of the games getting moved, he actually fit into cash game lineups pretty easily. I think he's probably before Cooper Kupp was off the slate, I would say he's the biggest positional advantage on the slate.
I will be right back.
Yeah, no worries. I'll keep it going. But now with Cooper Kupp no longer on the slate, the positional advantage probably goes to Davante Adams. But I think that playing Kittle in any format, along with Jimmy Garoppolo, is very viable. Jimmy Garoppolo has 303 very much in his range of outcomes against this Atlanta defense. And I actually like Jimmy a little bit more on DraftKings than I do on FanDuel, because I think it's more likely that he hits the 300 yard bonus than he does going off for like 4 touchdowns or something like that. We saw the Jeff Wilson experiment not go well last week. He's still not projecting very well, even with the news of Elijah Mitchell being out. But I mean, a post-hype sleeper, 5K on DraftKings, huge favorites. Like Jeff Wilson could, like, by the time I start building on Sunday, he could end up being like one of the better pivots of the week. If we look at salaries, we're going to have a mega chalk running back at 5,400, pivot to Jeff Wilson at $5,000. I mean, that might be an outstanding play. We didn't talk about Cordero Patterson. You were going to talk about CPAT before we blew up this outline. What are your thoughts on Patterson? Because him and Deebo, I'm actually not confident in them because of the way they're being used, and I think there's safer plays. Obviously, they have huge upside. I don't love either of them as cash game plays, but what do you think about CPAT?
Well, I think sometimes you got to trust the value rankings to a certain extent. And first of all, we kind of talked about how once you hit that 7.0 ranking, they're cash game viable. And then once you get to 10, you're almost at the lock button here. So Cordero Patterson, at least on FanDuel, has been hovering at that 7.0, 7.5 value projection. Yeah. And that's because he's been efficient all season. Earlier in the year, he was at like 7 points above expected in expected fantasy points per game. Now he's at like 2, which is actually a sustainable level of efficiency for him. To be honest, I just think it's a really good place to be on a team that's consistently losing, because if they throw 40 passes or more, they're probably getting dump offs to Cordero Patterson. So if you think that San Francisco is going to succeed on one side, I think, if I'm going to try to jam in a run back option, Cordero is my first option.
Yeah, if I'm using CPAT, I actually kind of, especially against San Francisco, I kind of like him more as a big underdog. We saw Mike Davis reemerge as what the Falcons consider a usable back. I want CPAT attacking that secondary a little bit, so it makes sense to me. I think I'm probably going to end up going elsewhere. Moving on to Houston and Jacksonville. James Robinson was he's the running back on the slate. It's crazy to say after what we've seen from the Jaguars the last few weeks, but Darrell Bevell taking over for Urban Meyer is very adamant that James Robinson is the starting back. is going to be used as such. Carlos Hyde isn't active, so we don't even have to worry about that. Jacksonville's favored for the first time since week 1. Houston is a disaster starting Davis Mills. So how are you attacking this game?
First of all, just A+ podcast host work there, vamping while the dogs were barking, while the Christmas gifts were arriving, and Jordan Vanek, A+ to you over here, and Sal with the dunk on the alley-oop. Look at this. If you're not on YouTube, you are absolutely missing out on these graphics.
Yeah, that's a good
I will
one.
say, the only thing that I'm concerned about is James Robinson missing this game. Because if James Robinson misses, then I have no idea what to do with that backfield. I'm probably just staying away. But if he's in, he is the clearest value at the running back position. He is fundamentally mispriced, as we've talked about before here, based on the projected value. Carlos Hyde already ruled out. And this is a little bit narrative based, but maybe we see a little bit of pep in the step of Jacksonville without Urban Meyer there anymore. Absolutely the right move here. And I will say, I am definitely getting to Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault in tournaments. I think they could absolutely smash here. Not to say
You're not playing
will.
Laquan? You're not playing Treadwell?
Oh, if Laquan Treadwell hitting will make so many mid-2010s rotovisors so happy that I think it would just be worth it.
Shout out to Davis Maddock.
Yeah, but I do think that you gotta say that Marvin Jones is the best tournament pivot with Robinson being so popular.
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked through this, again, like our whole slate kind of got blown up and our plan got blown up. As we've talked through this, we've talked about Gabe Davis, Devontae Parker, James Robinson now, Devontae Adams, all being these locks. At least on DraftKings, the cash game lineup actually kind of builds itself. Like, I'm actually really starting to like this because there isn't a running back that's projecting anywhere close to James Robinson. So we're definitely playing him in cash games. When we're thinking about how we want to approach the chalk in GPPs, we want to be able to replace that player with hopefully similar projection, and I don't think any running back is going to be projecting close to James Robinson this week. So it's a really interesting week because we're going to have, from a projection standpoint, Robinson, Kittle, and Devontae Adams just all lapping the field. So from the dynamic of how do we like to think about chalk, they actually are all very good chalk plays. I think if I'm going to fade one heavily, it's probably Robinson, even though we usually don't do that with the running back, just because the Jacksonville offense is still bad, right? Like, we still don't know if they can show up. That's my concern with him. He's a lock in cash games. I do love Marvin Jones as a pivot. He's probably my favorite leverage play of the week. His usage has been relatively consistent. His air yards have been around that 20% share mark all season. I don't know if we get the benefit of this right away just because Darrell Bevell's taking over midweek for an offense that just has been in disarray all year. But when Darrell Bevell has been a primary play caller, he has thrown or called the deep passes as much as any play caller in the league. If they can get that to translate to the field this Sunday, that would benefit Marvin Jones against a Texans defense that's one of the worst in the league against the deep ball, bottom 3 in QBR allowed on passes of 20 or more air yards, allowing the second most touchdowns on such passes. And we haven't talked much about defense on the slate. I think the Bills are going to be the chalk. Jaguars are one of the best value defenses on the slate. They're affordable on both sides. I believe they're sub 4K on FanDuel and they're 2,800 on DraftKings. So if you are going to play Robinson, I think it's probably pretty wise to just pair him with the Jacksonville defense and get that correlation there.
And we should also add here that there's a little bit narrative take, but it's also based in statistics. When we first saw Trevor Lawrence on the field in an NFL uniform, we saw him throwing 50 passes, and we saw him throw to Marvin Jones 11 times versus this same Texans team.
Yep.
You almost wonder, or at least I do, that maybe a ultra conservative, not very analytically oriented coach who was only going to last 13 games told him to run the damn ball way too often, because rational coaching tells you that what the Jaguars should actually do is let Trevor Lawrence pass his arm off, not literally, but pass as much as possible, see as many coverages as possible, so that when they have a more talented roster next season, he's more prepared. Do I know if they're going to do that? No. That's why James Robinson is the chalk play, because they're probably going to just give him 25 touches in this winnable matchup. But what they should do is let Trevor Lawrence throw 40 plus times every game for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I like Marvin Jones as a one-off because of all the things you just said. I don't know if, even if Trevor Lawrence does see an uptick in volume, I just don't know if he does enough to get there in what should be a pretty low-scoring game on the slate that still has some strong quarterback options. So I don't think you need to like pivot all the way to Lawrence, but it's not a horrible idea, because if James Robinson is the chalk and people are thinking he has some kind of slate winning ability in his projection, then that probably translates to the offense in some respect. Wrapping it up with this Pittsburgh-Tennessee game. Tennessee is traveling to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is favored by 1 point. The over-under is only 43.5. From my perspective, this is a pretty ugly game, but do you have anything to say about this one?
I'm always down to play Deontay Johnson when most people aren't going to play him, because, as we've said, his probability of getting 12 targets is probably higher than everybody except for maybe Cooper Kupp. Like, even Devontae Adams, the way he gets there, he doesn't necessarily have to have 12 targets. But again, I've said this definitely on a DFS MVP show in the past, but if the touchdown upside of the Steelers offense was higher on a per game basis, then Deontay Johnson's salary would make absolutely no sense. And remember, the Tennessee defense has not been good to opposing wide receivers this year. They're middle of the road in PFF defensive grade, but 30th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to go away. One wouldn't want to go to Deontay Johnson in a tournament situation. Chase Claypool is one of those players who I kind of have a leak on him, because like he never pops in opportunity metrics. He's constantly one of these solid contested catch, solid yards per reception guys that I can't quite get to. So for me, it's still Najee, it's Deontay, and I guess if you want to take a chance on a Titans player, Donta Foreman, because I think that he would get more usage in a closer matchup, which we project this to be.
Yeah, I don't, after that split we saw last week with Jeremy McNichols back in the fold, I don't think there's any way I touch the Tennessee backfield. Deontay Foreman is popping in some models across the industry, but I think there's better running back options. I think there's huge leverage opportunity with the running back on the other side. I just don't think a lot of people are going to go to Najee, even though he is a high touch guy. It's going to be James Robinson, maybe pay down, and maybe when I run projections, maybe Joe Mixon and Najee do get some ownership just out of just such a weak slate. But again, I think a lot of it will end up going to Zeke because they are huge favorites. But Najee and Mixon can be guys that really flip the slate. I think Julio Jones is interesting. Like you said, I agree. Deontay Johnson is a cash game play. I wouldn't say he's a lock on DraftKings just because he's kind of in an awkward salary range. But if he fits into your lineup, like he's obviously very viable. But I mean, Julio saw 6 targets only playing. I think he played half of the snaps last week. So if he gets a full complement of snaps, I mean, he could easily see 10 targets in this game against a Pittsburgh defense that has really struggled against the pass. So not fully stacking this game by any means, but I think maybe like a mini with Deontay and Julio could be pretty interesting. Crazy week 15, man. Again, we just kind of went off the rails this week just because so many things got blown up. It just seemed easier to go about it this way than give you guys a handful of values that might just be obsolete by the time kickoff comes around on Sunday. But definitely make sure you're checking out, especially the cheat sheets that come out tomorrow, the updated ownership leading up to kickoff, and probably the most important week of the season for Discord. Any last thoughts on the slate?
Yeah, thank you guys for hanging out with us. Thanks for sticking it through as all the content creators get their stuff updated and out with all this injury news. And please be safe if you're traveling to go see family for the holidays. We'll be back slightly before the big day, but just want to shout out everyone. Stay safe as you're listening and watching out there.
Yeah, definitely. We got one more show before the holidays, but reminder, we are going to 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time for DFS MVP next week. As always, if you're enjoying what we do here, please like and subscribe here on YouTube to the 4for4 channel. If you're listening on audio, please rate and review on iTunes and sign up for whichever one you don't use. Please sign up for that one because it helps us out a ton. And if you haven't signed up for that Discord yet, you can get access to the 4for4 DFS content plan for just $24 for the rest of the season. Use the code DFS MVP for an extra 10% off. Catch us through the regular season every Monday doing our cash game review at 2 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube. Every Saturday through the regular season DFS values with Yahoo's Matt Harmon. GPP Last Look Show, as I just mentioned, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern time for subscribers on our Discord channel. And please follow us on Twitter. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. Matt's at Draftaholic. I'm at TJ Hernandez. Talk to you guys on Monday.